Hi, and welcome to this live reading from Darkness into Love by Sophie Bartow. And this is presented by Itsy Bitsy Book Bits. Chapter 1. Swan Harbor, June 4th, 7 o'clock a.m. Princess. Cameron Hunter stared out over the beach and watched her. Her red gold hair blew around her shoulders. Her stride was just as smooth as when she skated competitively, and as it had for years, seeing her caused his heart to trip. What did that mean? He'd given her everything he had to offer, and yet, did you? Did you really? He brushed back his hair and took another drink of coffee. For the last few nights, he'd struggled to sleep. Waking early each morning, he'd taken a thermos and made his way to the cliff. Located on the edge of his parents' property, it jutted out over the water. During the day, it was the perfect place to think, and at night, the stars were bright. Jessie stopped and kicked at something in the sand. When she picked it up and stuck it into her pocket, he grinned. It reminded him of other times when she'd done the same thing. Suddenly, she looked up. Their eyes met across the distance. His heart stopped, and he almost turned his back on her, except he couldn't. That connection that had always pulled them together was still there. What are you going to do about it? Nothing. He wasn't going to do anything. That's how she wanted it, right? Cam took a step toward the path, then at the last minute, once again, met Jessie's gaze. He lifted his thermos and saluted her in greeting. Then he started down the cliff, hoping to escape the feelings seeing her elicited. When he reached the house, his brother Gray was standing over the coffee pot, watching it boil. Why didn't you make coffee? I did. Gray slanted him a look. But you didn't share. Are you going to tell Mom on me? It would be a waste of time. Oh, you are the baby after all. Cam ignored Gray and settled at the table with one of the last pastries. He had thought when she was out of sight, she wouldn't be at the forefront of his mind. Unfortunately, it didn't work like that. Want more? Gray asked once the coffee was brewed. Nah, I'm good. Gray settled at the table across from him. The look in his brother's steely blue eyes made him uncomfortable. What? You know what? He did, but he wasn't ready to acknowledge that. I thought you were going to Boston for a few days. Changing the subject doesn't change what I'm thinking about, Gray grunted. I think you know what. Maybe, Cam sighed. I'm just not ready, Gray muttered. I've heard that a time or two lately. It's still true. What about don't bring her into it? Cam shut him down. I can't. Love doesn't work like that. Cam laughed. Oh, how would you know? Are you in love? No, I'm just, you know what Mom would say, don't you? She would say the same thing to you, Gray returned. Listen to your heart. It always knows. But did it really? If someone had asked him that same question 3 years, hell, even 4 years ago, he would have agreed until she. Is that what you're doing? Low blow. Cam studied Gray for a few seconds and came back with, I didn't mean it to be one. Is there a problem between you and. I don't know what's going on. Gray cut him off. I'm hoping to figure that out on this trip. And if you don't? Gray shrugged. I'll deal with it then. He wanted to say, it seems we're both having issues. Except if he did so, it'd lead to assumptions, ones he wasn't ready to explain. Gray pushed back his chair and gave him a pointed look. While you might want to think our situations are similar, they aren't. Think about that while you're at the wedding and everyone is there. I'll see you in a few days. Cam waved his brother off and pushed his what-if thoughts away. He needed a shower and run a few errands while he tried to come up with a plan. Those thoughts propelled him in and out of the shower and toward town. One of his best friends was getting married, and he needed to pick up a few things. Sally's Diner, June 4th, 12 o'clock p.m. Here you go, Jess. Sally, the diner's owner, set a plate of fries and a milkshake in front of her. Enjoy. Jessie inhaled the greasy smell of the fries and sighed with contentment. I've missed these. Is it all you missed? It was a question meant to trap her. That was something Jessie knew for sure. Problem came when she tried to answer. Of course, I missed Swan Harbor. Sally glanced out the window. As she turned back, her blue eyes were twinkling. I bet you missed some things more than others, didn't you? She moved on, not really expecting an answer. But when Jessie glanced up, she wasn't surprised to see Cam passing by. Her heart stuttered for a second before taking off at full speed. He was alone, and there was a purpose in his walk. Was he on his way to see? Don't go there, Jess. She had another fry and thought back to her walk on the beach. Somehow she'd known Cam would be on the cliff watching her. He'd been there for 3 consecutive mornings. A part of her wanted to think it was intentional. In contrast, the other side wouldn't listen. Her life was what it was because of decisions she'd made, or was it? Could she have made a different choice? Except she wasn't ready to acknowledge the answer. If she did, then it would mean she'd wasted 2 years of her life. 2 years of their lives? That thought caused the ice cream to settle heavily in her stomach. Jessie pushed it aside, paid for the food, and escaped into the fresh air. It was summer and the tourist season for Swan Harbor. By July, the sidewalks would be crowded and the beaches full. Shop owners loved it, but most of the residents couldn't wait until September. She couldn't say if she liked one season more than the other. There were benefits to both, or at least she'd always thought so growing up. Crowded sidewalks were not her thing. In an hour, she was expected at the salon Foxy Lady. There was a wedding tonight, and she needed to be ready. After all, it was the reason she'd returned home. Is that the only reason? She sidestepped another visitor and started to cross the road. Suddenly, she was tugged backward just as a bicyclist whizzed past, barely missing her. It happened in the span of a heartbeat, but she'd known who'd saved her. Jessie's eyes flared. She quickly pulled her arm free and moved away from the flow of traffic. Her heart raced from the near miss, but that wasn't where her attention lay. I, I guess I should say thank you. She met Cam's gaze briefly before looking away. Don't say it on my account, Cam's mocking voice intoned. I would have done it for anyone. His response left a sting behind it. For a moment, she wasn't sure how to respond. Then she saw what he was carrying, making it easy to change the subject. You must be the one decorating the car. What did you buy? Cam smiled, one just big enough to briefly show off his dimples. I bought the good stuff. Meaning? Almost reluctantly, he opened his bag for her to peer inside. He bought markers, balloons, and twine. Who's bringing the cans? Cam shrugged. That wasn't my job. Who's blowing up the balloons? I would assume whoever we can get. Care to blow up a few? Jessie's eyes flared slightly. His voice was intimate, a tone she hadn't heard in 2 years. With it, regret once again rushed through her. She'd missed her chance, though, hadn't she? Anyway, thanks again. I'm due at the Foxy Lady. Then, as gracefully as possible, Jessie started toward the salon with a different question on her mind. How was she expected to make it through the wedding without falling apart? The Lighthouse Inn, June 4th, 4:15 p.m. Jessie. Cam ignored the conversation around him and prepared for the next step, the one that involved walking down the aisle with Jessie on his arm. Something he hadn't considered until the rehearsal, which he hid beneath a facade of happiness. The few times their gazes clashed, his heart raced. When he touched her, it caused his fingers to tingle. It hadn't affected her, though, or at least that's what he'd thought the night before. Tugging her back from the crazy bike rider showed him how wrong he'd been. As soon as their gazes collided, he saw the shadows in her eyes. He noticed how she constantly rubbed her fingers over her arm where they'd touched. Those were nothing compared to what happened when she looked in the bag. Her breath hitched, just as it had in the past. When she glanced up, a rosy hue was spread across her cheeks. Her voice was husky and a touch breathless. Behaviors that gave hope. Could he trust them? He wanted to think he was happy, but he wasn't sure he believed it. Wanted to think he hadn't missed her, but knew he was lying to himself. Wanted to believe Jessie was his past, and while that was true, she was also his future. When he thought about everything, it didn't seem to matter. Even after she'd crushed him, he couldn't stay away from her. Their hearts were connected, and always would be. That should have made everything easy, right? Except it didn't. He was willing to admit he still loved her. The question was, could he trust her again? Finding the answer to that question was put on hold when the minister pulled the groom away. Seconds later, the bride and bridesmaids joined the groomsmen almost unconsciously. His gaze drifted to her. Jessie was fussing with the bride's dress. She knew where he was standing. That was evident by the number of times she glanced up. How he felt when it happened didn't help his peace of mind, though. It's about time, the coordinator whispered. Men, find the women you're escorting down the aisle. Hurry, here comes the music. Cam started walking toward Jessie, who gave him the once-over. Her silent scrutiny left prickles of warmth dancing along his skin, and his nether regions stirred to life. A friend. She's only a friend. It's much safer. Nice words, but did he believe them? Ready? I think so. Cam offered Jessie his arm. When she hooked hers through, he could feel her heat, could hear the catch in her breath. Here we go. He ignored the fact that everyone was watching them, ignored the heady smell of Jessie's perfume, ignored how her arm felt in his and focused on putting one foot in front of the other. What he hadn't considered, though, was that when he stood on the groom's side, she was directly in his line of sight. Dearly beloved, the minister began, we are gathered here today. With every word, the barriers he built around his emotions started to crumble. With every line the bride and groom repeated, Cam's dreams of the future reappeared. With every crack in his carefully constructed facade fading away, his heart was no longer safe. Was that something he could accept? He wanted to say no, wanted to say he couldn't go through anything like that again, and then, I now pronounce you man and wife. You may kiss your bride. Cam's eyes locked with Jessie's. In them, he saw everything he'd ever wanted looking back at him. Was it still possible to protect his heart? Or better yet, did he even want to?